fun question and something that we probably should get clear on immediately. Star Trek, the original, Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Discovery. Which one's the best?
We don't subscribe to fandom hate, so we're not going to say which one is objectively the best, but I'm happy to speak to my personal favorite, which is the original series, because I feel a real kinship with Captain Kirk.
This is Justine Mastin, the Captain Kirk to Larisa Garski's Spock. As licensed therapists, they've co-authored Starship Therapise, a book that teaches you how to use pop culture mythology to rewrite your life. And I figured if we were going to talk Star Trek, I needed to ask this question up front to make sure we could still be friends.
And then a very, very, very close second is Next Gen.
Larisa?
I would say that like Next Gen is always, I think, going to be the closest to my heart, but I enjoy all of them except Discovery. I'm going to like stray slightly off.
It's interesting.
I thought you liked Disco.
Oh, wait, no. I take that back. I wasn't thinking of our current Discovery with Sonequa Martin Green. I was thinking of Enterprise.
Yeah.
That awful one with the Basset Hound. I'm like...
I know we were going to say we weren't going to shame one of them, but...
I know. And like when you didn't even say it, Justine was like setting out this beautiful intention, like we're not going to engage in hate. And I'm going off that path. I'm straying from the intention because I really don't like it.
Well, I was going to say, you notice I didn't even bring it up. Like I didn't even say it.
Yeah.
So I was trying to not engage in hate. I was trying to just not, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. So here we are.
Is that the one with the quantum leap guy?
Scott Bakula?
Yeah, Scott Bakula.
I mean, poor him. I mean, that's the writers and producers' fault. He did the best he could.
Certainly. I think we can give him that. I think my understanding and like talking to other folks is that like there are parts of this show that like some people really, really resonate with. And that's beautiful. But just to like clear it up, no, I'm a huge fan of Disco. I'm all about it. I think it's amazing and great.
These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Her continuing mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no human has gone before.
I'm Rachel Wilkinson, and welcome to Lifemancy. It's great to be back with a new episode, and I'm especially excited to let you know that I finally finished the new Lifemancy website. Emily Terranova worked with me to create this lovely new podcast cover, which now has a matching website. Huge shout out to the Lifemancy patrons for helping make this new look possible. And because patrons are so integral to this show's existence, I created a new podcast covers special offer. I have stickers and magnets featuring the new art that I will be sending out to any existing, upgrading, or new patrons who join the Patreon fan club in the next 3 days. So yeah, go to lifemancy.com to check out the fancy new look and then follow the fan club link to take advantage of this special offer. Again, it's just for 3 days because that's how many different podcast covers I have had now. Hopefully, I will never have to do this again. But if I do, then maybe next time you'll get 4 days. But this time, check it out before Thursday to get some fun swag. All right. July got really crazy there for a minute, and I needed to get my life together because I was in Nashville, Tennessee for Podcast Movement 2021. I had actually signed up for Podcast Movement 2020, which was going to be in Dallas, within delightful driving distance. But then we all know what happened. So they transferred my ticket to Nashville 2021. And honestly, for a minute there, I didn't even know if I was going to go given the state of the world. But now I'm back, and because I think they'll both appreciate the sentiment of this, I am dedicating this opening to Rob C. Thompson of Occult Confessions and Bill, that Piscean complication I mentioned a few episodes back. They both left 5-star written reviews for the show, and this, my two podcast buddies, is my thanks. I was sitting in the Nashville airport jotting down some notes for this episode, finally able to rest after hoofing it to the top floor of the Gaylord Opry Convention Center every morning for a week. It was Podcast Movement's 2021 convention and my second year attending. My first year was Podcast Movement 2019, and I was a doe-eyed innocent about 6 months into my podcasting adventure with Lifemancy. And in 2019, I asked questions during sessions, talked to vendors, and jumped into all of the networking events. Basically, I created an extroverted Rachel the Podcaster character and LARPed her for a week. And it worked out for me. I met a couple of people I still keep in touch with today. This year, especially with the pandemic, I was less hyped and less interested in networking. But I was laser focused on learning 2 things. 1, how to create better podcasts. And 2, the real words for audio editing tools instead of, calling it the wavy line doohickey and the heat map thingamabob. P.S. It is called a parametric equalizer and spectral layer. Thank you very much. Hold your applause. And yet, even as I introverted the hell out of the Nashville convention with a big black mask across my face, I still met people, which was good. Every podcaster I have ever met is welcoming and generous, though, let's be honest, it was a convention of hundreds of people who like to talk. So I guess it was a little like going to a sushi convention and being glad you're able to find fish. But there is a dark side to this conviviality, a single question that dogged me the entire time. That question was, and what do you do? No matter how I explained it, it always came down to some version of, I write role-playing books about vampires and podcast about witchcraft. And every time, it's the same reaction. There is a moment of pause while they process the thing I just said, like they aren't quite sure they heard me correctly. And then when they realize they did hear me correctly, I usually get something like, oh, neat, or oh, wow, or that's cool. And I feel bad for them because after that, they're sort of like, okay, I got nothing. At which point I tend to erase myself and turn the conversation back to whatever it is that they do. Because my writing and podcasting is so very, very niche and sometimes even off-putting to people, I always feel a little isolated even when I'm surrounded. And while I really enjoy talking to people who are different than me or who are interested in subjects I know nothing about, I didn't realize how much this dance wore me down or how much energy it took to keep my guard up until I was in yet another one of these situations. There were 4 or 5 of us in this group of people, and we were doing the "and what do you do" circle. And suddenly I realized it was my turn, and I said I wrote RPGs, LARPs, and had a metaphysical podcast. Then I braced myself, which is when the guy next to me said, "Oh, cool, yeah, I stream on Twitch." The relief that washed over me was unexpected. I didn't even realize how much stress I was carrying until I didn't have to do so much work to have a break time chat. Suffice to say, I spent the next 45 minutes hanging out with Sam, the audio editor. And reflecting on that moment, I can see why we build cultural villages and then never step out of them. If we're all carrying around this low-grade anxiety from the constant stress of the last couple of years, why wouldn't you build a coven of like-minded individuals so you can just stop doing so much extra work for a minute? And obviously, this is why we want so badly to find our people. But so often, especially with people like us who are into really niche things like alternative religions or pop culture fandoms, it's really hard to find professionals like doctors, lawyers, or therapists who can relate. My therapist is great. Wouldn't trade him for anybody, but it's taken him a long time to get up to speed with vampires and witches and role-playing and podcasts. This is why I was so excited about the work Larisa and Justine are doing. They understand us because they are nerdy podcasters themselves, and reading their book was a lot like meeting Sam, the audio editor. Whether it's identifying your own core values based on the Hogwarts houses, understanding trauma through the eyes of Dean Winchester, or finding your inner magic with the help of High Kings Elliot and Margot. Here were two therapists who lived in the same contextual universe as me, and probably you too. So yeah, I wanted to talk to them and get them on the show, which we will jump to right after the astrology report. So I thought about playing this straight, talking about how this conjunction has a lot of great energy and opportunities for good things to happen, like job opportunities, new relationships, getting your creative work into the world. And you should absolutely take advantage of this freedom to pursue your dreams. But that wasn't really in keeping with the theme of today's episode. So instead, I want you to see the next few days as an awakening, like Maeve in Westworld, and break free of your regular programming. Take control of your own tablet, change your storyline, go after whatever drives you, and smoke anything that gets in your way. Jupiter is showing you the door to a new reality, and good news for you, you can probably walk through it without committing as much murder. Maybe. And on that note, let's talk to some therapists. Licensed marriage and family therapist Larisa A. Garski and Justine Mastin are research partners, co-authors, and podcast hosts who pair psychology with the power of fan fiction and modern mythology. They help nerds, gamers, cosplayers, and members of all fandoms boldly go into therapy. They've appeared at pop culture conventions like Wizard World and Comic-Con and have been covered by outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Sci-Fi, Geek and Sundry, US Gamer, Bustle, and others. They argue that stories, whether experienced via TV shows, movies, or video games, aren't frivolous distractions, but are a way to engage creatively with the world. And they are here to talk with us about Starship Therapise, their new book. Welcome, Larisa and Justine.
Thank you.
So excited to be here.
And we're laughing because I finally said their book name correctly.
It's okay. You are not alone.
Third time's the charm.
Yeah. Speaking of Star Trek, how did we get Kirk and Spock? So Justine, you're Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
Larisa, you are Spock. When did this come up? When was the moment? What was the story behind this?
This is a great question.
Yeah, and we get this question quite frequently, and the short answer is we don't remember.
That's when you know it's good, right?
Right.
Yeah, the longer answer is, I mean, Larisa and I are best friends in real life, and we just like have little nicknames for each other.
Yes.
And we often call each other Moose and Squirrel.
From Supernatural.
And is very appropriate. I mean, we're sitting down so you can't see this, and it's the internet, but Larissa's a very tall human, and I am a very tiny human.
Mm-hmm.
And so the moose and squirrel thing is really, really appropriate.
Very appropriate.
But so is Kirk and Spock, because I am just naturally a bit more gregarious.
Are you perhaps full of leadership?
Yes. And charm.
Which we could, it's not bossy, it's a leader.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's grand ideas that are perhaps unrealistic.
I mean, some of them are, but some of them aren't. And that's where Spock comes in. Spock is really good at like helping Kirk figure out what are grand ideas that perhaps it's time to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
What are grand ideas that we could put into action? What are the steps that we're going to need to take to put those grand ideas into action?
Yeah. And then I get so sad.
This is reminding me of after we signed to our publisher to write the book, I was like, now we're going to come up with a writing plan and a schedule. And Justine was like, oh, okay.
Yep.
How'd that work out for you?
It worked really well.
Really well, surprisingly, because like I think part of what makes our partnership and our duo work is that we both are very aware of like what are our natural strengths and what are the other person's natural strengths. And we're very open to the other one like helping us with areas that we might get stuck on. So like I'm very good at putting together schedules, but I can also get really hung up on them. And so I know when I'm starting to get really attached to a specific kind of outcome, I go to Justine and I'm like, hey, how do we make this more doable? How can we bring in the flexibility? And she does. She brings in the flexibility.
Great.
So the full answer would be that I don't know when we started calling each other Kirk and Spock, but I do know that once we started doing it, that dovetailed really nicely into us coming up with our podcast because the podcast came first. And in the podcast, very similar to the book, we talk about psychology and fandom and how do those two things like work together to help us enact change in our life and our planet and our universe. And I was truly terrified to go on the air.
She was.
I was truly terrified. Perhaps right now you're thinking, how could that be, Larisa? You seem so nice and gregarious. And like, if you are thinking that, listeners and Rachel, that's nice of you. But when we started out in 2017, I was really terrified. I had a lot of stage fright. And so I really needed us to lean into our Star Trek persona, I guess, because that helped me get out of my head about what was I doing. And it helped me be in the moment in the show because I was cosplaying.
So you have a podcast and the podcast then inspired this book. So why did you decide to write the book? Who did you write the book for? What are you hoping people get out of it?
These are all great questions. And part of me is like, oh, they're so big. But here we go. We'll have a conversation about these questions. It's okay.
Sure.
I think what I hope that people take out of the book and who we wrote the book for, we wrote the book for adults, teens, even kids who are really into fandom and who feel left out of sort of this like wellness, self-care thing that we've been doing in the last like 20 or so years, right? And so a lot of what the book is about is looking at both concepts from like yoga and mindfulness and psychotherapy and fusing them with fandom and the power of stories and narratives. So like, for example, a very common therapeutic technique when it comes to anxiety is find a way to give yourself distance from your anxious thoughts. For some people, just like giving them that prompt is enough and they know what to do. For me, and I think for lots of geeks, maybe it's, I mean, I can figure out a way to work with it, but it doesn't feel very fun. And what feels a lot more fun is when I think about my anxiety and turn it into anxiety gremlins from both Gremlins 1 and 2, that great 1980s classic. They're very problematic films. If any of our listeners have like seen them, like they're very problematic, but this idea that Gizmo is this cute, furry little mogwai, and he comes with this specific set of self-care instructions. And if he doesn't follow those instructions, and if the people around him don't help him follow those instructions, then he grows gremlins who just cause havoc everywhere. That's very similar to what happens for us as human beings. We're going to sprout our own version of anxiety gremlins. And so thinking of them as anxiety gremlins, it feels like fun. It helps me get distance. It helps clients get distance from their anxious thoughts. And then we can start to feel not just more playful, but more flexible in terms of our approach. So we're getting out of some of those like cognitive ruts that we can get into.
And it makes therapy so much more enjoyable And, sometimes when I talk about this, people are like, is therapy supposed to be enjoyable? I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be torture, right? We want to learn about ourselves. We want to make change, and change is hard, but the act of discussing the change doesn't have to be hard and awful, right? I mean, my therapy sessions, my clients run the gamut of emotions, but there's usually like a lot of laughter because we're talking about like, uh-oh, do we have anxiety gremlins loose in the house? And the client's like, I do have anxiety gremlins loose in the house. Like, okay, client, what are we going to do? They're running around, they're smoking, they're wearing hats. This is unacceptable. What are we going to do? And how do we get the gremlins back in the basket? And it's still therapy, but it's not this drudgery.
Was there any subject that you found particularly difficult tackling with the book?
What immediately comes to my mind is we have a chapter in the book, chapter 11.
This is where my head went immediately. Beautiful. Go ahead.
I figured, yeah. We talk a lot about societal, cultural, universal impacts in the book as well, because, we're marriage and family therapists, which is kind of a misnomer. If you're listening and you're not familiar, people hear it and they're like, oh, that's nice. It's like this squishy thing where like you work with couples and families and like that sounds nice. But MFTs are actually like real rebel badasses who are systemic thinkers. So it's systems and relationships. So we're not just looking inside of the person, we're looking at the family the person came from, the society the person lives in, the world the person lives in, the universe the person lives in. So it felt really important to us to have a chapter about the earth that we live on and how that's dying.
Yes.
Because we can't have a self-help book if there's nowhere to live to work on those interventions. And we both agreed that this was an important thing to put in the book. We're like, how does this not just become the hugest bummer that people put this book down, immediately give us 1-star reviews, and like never open it up again?
And to be fair, I think that some of that still did happen. I think that this chapter, I mean, we've gotten some interesting feedback, and like all books are going to do that. But like on the one hand, we have been either accused or applauded for witchcraft.
And
which we didn't.
But you're applauded here, so yay.
Right. Thank you. I really appreciate that. We didn't necessarily set out to do witchcraft, but like I think we ended up doing it. So people have had some strong feelings and pros and cons about the witchcraft of the book.
Yep. And identity politics and critical race theory and talking about gender and body norms. Which, again, some people were like, wow, yes, finally. And some people were like, this is not what I wanted in my book about science fiction.
And so I think for some folks too, chapter 11 has been challenging because I think we ended up doing it in a way that really honored kind of the intention of the book, which was to talk about serious things with playfulness and with joy and fun and whimsy. But we do get really serious and we really talk about things that are having a negative impact. And we invite people to sit with things like, every day when you wake up and go to have breakfast, something died to give you that breakfast.
Yeah. Real uplifting.
Right? Real uplifting. There's like not a lot of lightness and brightness. And one of the fandoms we then used to really help us bring some of that lightness back was the video game Outer Wilds.
That is my next question.
Yes.
So please, I just needed to talk about Outer Wilds because what a deceptively powerful video game. I don't know if people realize how incredibly intense this video game is when it is displayed as cute aliens in a little world. So one of the things that my husband and I enjoy doing most are couch co-ops.
Yes.
So if there's a couch co-op, we will likely play it. We have cooked so many different hamburgers in the Cooking the Hamburgers and the Spaceship of Love. I can't even remember all the names of these things.
Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time.
Yes, Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time.
My husband and I play that too.
Yes. So we thought, oh, look, it's cute. What is this Outer Wilds thing? Had no idea the premise. None.
Yeah.
I was almost traumatized
Yeah, that's fair.
At at first, I was like, we were both entirely confused. We thought we had done something wrong. I don't even know if this is spoilers, no spoilers, but essentially the universe exists for 22 minutes.
And then you die and you restart.
Yes, and you are essentially stuck in a time loop, a 22-minute time loop.
Yeah.
In which you are exploring a metaphorical representation of our own universe.
Mm-hmm.
And you are trying to solve this mystery, but you only have these few minutes. And every time you know you are going to die and you're going to have to start over again. I was kind of obsessed with this part of the book. So, because it was sort of like, oh, Rachel, look at your issues right on a page.
Aww.
So, yeah, but you were talking about anticipatory distress, loneliness, staying present, non-attachment, and accepting the time that we have. Would you like to talk more about that?
I mean, I would, but like what's happening for me right now, and this always happens when we talk about chapter 11, like I start to hear the song that they play in Outer Wilds, and it just like starts to go in my little head. And like, so the entire time I'm like, Larisa, don't cry right now. Don't cry right now. The people are not going to be able to hear anything you have to say if you just start weeping. I mean, that is the video game. The video game really is like inviting you to sit with all of these hard things while also solving this great space-time continuum murder mystery, which is very compelling and fascinating. And I think it's the combination that helps the player's system tolerate. It's like sitting with a lot of this tragedy because there's still fun and whimsy and mystery.
Well, you can also get focused on unlocking the little codes and working on the task. It's almost sort of like the game itself helps you stay present because you know that you're on this countdown clock. You know you have to solve so many puzzles and mysteries and
22 minutes.
Yes, and in this thing. And so it's sort of like you are only focused on the one thing that you are doing, which I found really interesting because so my husband and I, that wasn't really a couch co-op, but we still played it like a couch co-op in the sense that I would take a turn, he would take a turn. We would sort of share experiencing this. Or if there was something that I could not get through, especially when it talks about the twitchy things like hand-eye coordination and skills, I was like, that is you. It's sort of like you are Spock and Kirk, you know each other's strengths. If it was time to decode something, Rachel, time for you to decode something. You know, when it was figuring out some sort of what is the answer to this weird puzzle that has symbols and strange shit in it, that's Rachel's realm. But if we need you to go fast and jump on things, that's Dayan's realm.
Aww.
So we would have to, and we would decide, all right, what planet are we tackling next? What's the problem that we're going to deal with next? So we had to huddle up, decide what was the one thing that we were going to accomplish, which I really felt was that staying present aspect of it.
Yeah.
And then it was, all right, who needs to do what? And I remember a couple of times there was swapping in the middle of it.
I love Rachel. I love a couple things. First is that like the way you're describing that you and your partner played this game is almost identical to the way me and my partner played it, with the slight change that it's a first person game and I get terrible migraines and I can't play first person games. It does weird things to like my vestibular system. So I would just like tell him where to go and what to do. The entire time we played this game. So I really love that you shared that because like it resonated with my own personal experience. And I think that the way you play this game in community is exactly like it fits so well with the themes of the game itself. And it also fits really well with what we talk about in chapter 11, which is that like we can do hard things, but only if we do them together.
So how did you reconcile your feelings about chapter 11? What made you decide that you were going to go forward with it despite your own inner insecurities with it?
Well, so we're both therapists, and it can be pretty great having a best friend who's also a therapist. And we wrote the book in chapter order, and it kept being like, actually, let's skip 11. Let's come back to 11. No, let's do 11 tomorrow. No, let's do 11 next week. And at some point, I think it was me, I just said, like, let's just write anything.
Yeah.
Let's just get some stuff down, and then we can decide what to do. And initial draft, like the initial draft of everything isn't great.
Yeah.
We were like, you know what? This is okay. And then we just like worked our way through it and we're like, okay, this is too upsetting.
Well, and you were the one who was often doing that for this chapter.
It's not untrue.
I was like leaning into the darkness.
You are very gloomsy doomsy.
Well, and I think part of that is for me, I'm like, I feel like people are not paying attention in the way that I wish that they would in terms of like what's dire in the current state of our planet. And so my go-to is like, if I just like shake someone and tell them how awful it is, surely that will work, right? And Justine is really good at being like, you're hurting them. Like, stop what you're doing, metaphorically, let this person sit down. Like, this is not working. And so I would go in and I would write something that was very doom and gloom. And Justine would come in because we wrote simultaneously in a Google Doc, and Justine would be watching the words. And then she would invite me to pause and she would say, okay, that's a lot. Let me go in. Let me go in and kirk it up. Let me bring some lightness here. We need some levity. We need some puzzle games like they have in Outer Wilds. We can't just do 4 paragraphs on factory farming, Larisa.
Well, right. I mean, I think that's ultimately what made this probably one of our better chapters. I'm very proud of the entire book, but I'm especially proud of the parts where we talked about really hard stuff and made it accessible and understandable and relatable. You know, we went in and we're like, okay, so we talked about this tough stuff that is happening in the world. Now, how do we relate it to fandom? How do we make it so that it is relatable, understandable, and like just the tiniest 2% of fun? Because this is a hard thing to make fun. But, you know, if we're going to talk about how people are ignoring the pandemic, let's talk about zombies. You know, if we're going to talk about draining of resources, let's talk about vampires. Like, let's get some monsters in here.
Yes. Well, yeah. And vampires are my jam. So, but you also counterbalance that. You also have some really empowering things. Do you want to talk about the magicians and how you decided to use these personalities as ways to become more powerful versions of yourself?
Sure. Well, I wanted to do the magicians right off the bat. Justine had not watched the magicians. What finally prompted her to watch the magicians is in most of like, we have case studies in the book. So it's therapy case studies. So we take, in the case of the magicians, we used Hiking Margot and Elliot and imagined them in a therapy session with Justine and I and like wrote out what that was like. Most of these case studies that we did, we wrote simultaneously together. This one I did almost all myself because at that point, Justine hadn't seen the magicians. And I loved that Margot and Elliot were this opportunity to talk about polyamory, which gets a lot of like negative press, and really look at these two characters and look at their incredible bond and explore that in a way that did justice to those characters. And I think, frankly, hopefully did justice to people who do live in polyamorous community in a way that is really sustaining and lovely and for them and their many partners. So I wrote it and then Justine read it. And for those who know Margot and Elliot, they use a lot of colorful, sexually charged language that I, as a Spock, don't...
Colorful metaphors.
Colorful metaphors. Right. I don't use these a lot in my daily life. So Justine read this and she was like, oh my God.
Right. I was like, what is happening?
You have to watch to understand.
Yeah. And so then Justine watched it and then we got to put more of Elliot and Margot and the whole Magicians gang in the book. And so that was just really a lot of fun and really lovely.
Yeah. We made an agreement. Larisa was like, you just have to watch one episode to get the flavor. Right. I was like, yeah, that makes sense because I do not understand what is happening here. This is not how you speak.
This feels wrong on certain levels.
Yes, it does feel wrong. But, you know, as soon as I watched the first ep, I was like, this is good. And I watched the whole way through. And now I watched till the end. And Larisa actually didn't watch the final season.
No, I wasn't ready for it to be over.
And you know what? It's okay. You don't have to.
I appreciate that.
Speaking of, because Justine's about to get real mad at me. Real mad.
Okay.
But Game of Thrones, bad ending or worst ending ever?
My personal opinion, this is not an objective opinion for all people. It was so bad. It was so bad for a number of reasons. I wouldn't say it's the worst ending ever. I feel like I've seen worse endings to shows. Honestly, can't think of one off the top of my head, but I feel like there are.
There's got to be something out there, right?
Right.
The way they did my Danny so dirty.
Oh, that's what I wanted to specifically talk about. So one of the biggest, I read a lot of stuff on Facebook and people are like, no, you could totally see this coming and it was totally understandable and this was totally in line with her character.
No.
I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a character who has spent essentially her entire rebirth freeing people only to slaughter all of them.
Yeah. The narrative of the Targaryen madness.
Yeah.
I was like, great. A hysterical woman.
And demonization of mental health issues. They gave us a 2-for-1.
Yeah. It's a double trope. It was 2 of my least favorite tropes. Right? Because she had some righteous anger.
Mhm.
And if they had displayed it like she was just rolling with her righteous anger and she was like, Cersei's whole kingdom going down. I could have rolled with that. But that it was the bells triggered her madness and she killed her. No. Like either she has a righteous anger that she's enacting or let's not have any of this. Just have her get Cersei out of the tower.
Right. Or have her like focus and attack the tower. Like it just didn't work. It didn't work.
And I hope that's not what George does for the final book.
Well, I hope George has learned some lessons from the reaction of the community to not do that. I found it completely lazy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so lazy.
Yeah.
And I pretty much hated everything that happened to every woman at the end, even Cersei.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
It was sort of like, okay, so you take Dany, here is this woman who has agency over her whole life and really agency over the lives of other people, completely lose it in a moment. All of it is gone and she is only reacting by the whims of some other thing. And then on the other side, you have Cersei who couldn't be who she was until she was a mother. And then it was once she has a child in her womb, now she can be this fierce lioness instead of just being a fierce lioness. Like it was. And then Arya gets sort of forgotten, kind of thrown off to an island and forgotten.
I'm going west to Westeros later.
I know. He's like Arya, Columbus. It was very strange. And the show did such a great job. And one of the things that we do talk about in the book is that these ancient archetypes, right? These ancient characters and themes that have lived in human consciousness and our unconscious for hundreds of years. Game of Thrones it did such an amazing job of tapping into the power, the magic, if you will, of these narrative archetypes, only to, in the end, it just felt like it exploited all that power and did all of the characters so dirty. And like they were very much with Dany and a lot of the strong women characters engaging with that goddess archetype, which is powerful and strong, brutal and caring, compassionate, but like righteously angry, right? Like both like death and rebirth, all of it. And then they wrecked it. They took these things that mean so much to all of us and they wrecked it.
Yeah. So it was extremely disappointing that my fan fiction would have ended differently. Really? Jon Snow is the only one who gets like a nice ending.
Sure.
You know, it's so funny. Everybody came in and said, oh, nerdy shit. We're going to have a real fun interview. It's like climate crisis, the destruction of goddess archetypes.
Actually, I love that that's what's happening because people don't take nerd shit seriously enough.
Right.
You know, because like science fiction has always been on the forefront of social change.
Yeah.
What was the first interracial kiss?
Kirk and
Uhura. Right? And like it's always science fiction folks, fantasy folks who are pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
And are they always doing it perfectly? No. But, you know, they're challenging the narrative and going, what if? What if this? What if it was a socialist future?
Right.
And we have a Black woman on the bridge of a starship. And now we have basically a therapist on the bridge of a starship.
Yeah.
Right. We're saying that
emotions matter, that being in touch with those things matter. They matter so much that they should be centered in how we lead and leading together as a community.
Yeah, well, if there was one thing you wanted listeners to take with them in their day, what do you want them to keep in mind? Is there something that you want them to try? Aside from buy the book, which we will get to in a second. But yeah, is there anything that you want them, like a nugget or anything that you want them to take with them?
Sure.
A nugget.
Should I go, Justine, and then you can see if you found a jewel, a gem to offer?
Oh, please. Please, Spock, go first.
I've been thinking a lot about magic recently, in part because of preparation for being here with you, Rachel, on your podcast, but also because I'm starting to get into tarot. And that's been really fun as like a magical prompt. And so I guess what I want to offer to folks that they can take or leave, whatever kind of feels best to them as autonomous human beings, is that magic is absolutely a force. It absolutely is something that is real and tangible. Does it mean that I can literally turn myself into a wolf right now? No. Magic as metaphor, magic in terms of can I like channel what the wolf symbolizes? Absolutely. And I think the world is so much more wondrous and fun when you let magic back in. And magic can exist right alongside reason and logic and rationalism. Take it from a Spock.
And so I'm just going to jump right off that because I was very much hoping that I could do that. This is one of the wonderful things that Spock brings to our relationship. And as you're thinking about magic, remember that magic doesn't come from skill. Magic comes from pain.
That's fair.
Right? And it doesn't mean that we have to put ourselves in a state of suffering.
No.
But it means that as we go through uncomfortable change, that's where magic is sparked. So if you, friends at home listening, are currently having a hard time, you're making magic.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, I was going to say on that beautiful note, shameless plug time, where can people find your book?
You can find our book wherever books are sold.
That's right.
I know it sounds like we self-published it because it's so weird, but no.
Oh, real humans read this idea and were like, yes.
Chose to publish this book. Yes.
So you can find this on Penguin Random House. You can find this on North Atlantic Books or wherever you like to buy your books, whether it be the big box shops. The biggest box shop right now has a 20% off on our book, I noticed. So depending on when you're listening to this, I don't know if that'll still be true, but if you're looking for some savings and you don't mind giving your money to a billionaire wannabe astronaut, which no judgment.
Yeah. Space race billionaires. Yeah.
Or you could support your local bookshop, whatever works for you and whatever is available to you. We recognize sometimes the Spaceship Man is your best option to get a book, and we do not judge you.
No, we don't.
Thank you so much for coming today and sharing all of your thoughts with the listeners. I've loved this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were finally able to
connect and do it.
The God smiled on us today.
Yes.
You can follow Justine and Larisa on Instagram at Starship_therapists and on Twitter at Podcast Starship. And you should absolutely check out their podcast called Starship Therapise. Honestly, I think that's one of the great things about the world we live in right now, which I know is a huge bummer in a whole lot of other ways. But whether it's conventions or by listening to podcasts, it is so much easier to find the people who get us. Because let me tell you, raise your hand if you had to search through weird AOL chat rooms or sketchy GeoCities websites to maybe find the one other witch in your neighborhood. Now you can't Google the word witch without spending the next month getting served ads for tarot readers and witchy bath bombs and learn to be a witch summer camps on literally every social media account you own. Oh, I remember the early 1990s. Oh, yes. I actually did meet that one other witch in the neighborhood. He was the librarian for the next town over. But that is a story for another day when I do Gaulish polytheism. Which, yes, is still on the docket, but oh my God. You all's names. I love you. I do. But no, really, I need to call one of you so you can pronounce everything. And that's it for today. Remember to check out the new website. I'm really proud of it. I custom coded it myself, which took months. So the least you can do is type in lifemancy.com. Also, give Emily Terranova a big round of applause as well. Until next time, friends, find that special someone who talks nerdy to you.